Elias thought the half-frozen bride needed one night of shelter. By morning, she had found missing grain. By the third day, she uncovered stolen cattle. A week later, she proved someone had forged his dead father's name. Clara had not come to Red Willow Ranch to be rescued. She had arrived carrying the only evidence that could save it. Snow had swallowed the road to Silver Creek before Elias Reed noticed the dark line staining the field beyond his northern fence. At first, he thought it was a wounded animal dragging itself through the storm. Then lightning whitened the ridge, and he saw a woman in a torn wedding dress, stumbling through snow deep enough to bury her boots. Ice clung to the lace around her shoulders. One cheek was bruised. Blood marked the sleeve pressed against her ribs. Still, she held a leather book beneath her coat, as though it mattered more than the life leaving her body. Elias reached the gate when her knees gave way. She tried to crawl backward from him, terror rising in her eyes at the sight of another man. "Please don't make me go back." The words were barely louder than the wind. He removed his coat and wrapped it around her before lifting her from the frozen ground. She fought only once, twisting to make certain the leather book remained against her chest. Beyond the ridge, several riders moved through the storm, their lanterns appearing and vanishing between sheets of snow. Elias carried her toward the ranch house. Beneath the barn lantern, the book slipped partly from her grasp. A broken willow branch had been burned into its cover. It was the private seal of Thomas Reed, Elias's father, who had been dead for nearly 6 years. When Elias looked back toward the ridge, one rider had stopped above the fence. The stranger watched him carry the woman inside, then turned his horse toward Silver Creek. Clara Whitmore woke beneath a heavy quilt with the taste of smoke in her mouth. Frost covered the bedroom window, and her torn wedding dress hung near the stove. A plain wool dress and oversized boots waited beside the bed. Then she saw the empty chair. The leather book was gone. She forced herself upright, ignoring the pain around her ribs, and searched the room until she found it resting on a table near the wall. Only when she held it against her chest did her breathing slow. Elias Reed appeared with broth, bread, and coffee. He stopped at the doorway instead of entering without permission. The storm had buried the road to Silver Creek, he explained, and no wagon could leave until the snow cleared. Clara promised to repay him. It was the only piece of dignity she still possessed. After her father died, Silas Voss produced papers claiming the small house and the desk where Amos Whitmore had kept decades of ranch accounts. No one questioned the figures. The Voss family controlled the grain warehouse, the freight office, and enough debt to silence half the county. Nathaniel Voss offered Clara work copying invoices. He spoke kindly when others were watching and promised marriage when the town began calling her a burden. Clara mistook that promise for safety. Then she noticed the numbers. Feed shipments were charged twice. Cattle were sold beneath altered brands. Interest appeared before payments were due. Small ranches carried debts their owners had never mentioned. Red Willow Ranch appeared more often than any other property. Its balance increased even after payments were made. Supplies were purchased but never delivered. Loan papers carried the signature of Thomas Reed, though the man had been dead for years. Clara began copying dates in secret. On the night before the wedding, she overheard Nathaniel and his father discussing an auction. They planned to seize Red Willow before spring using forged loans, sell the cattle, and repeat the same scheme against 3 smaller ranches. The leather book was locked behind Nathaniel's desk. Clara took it because it contained the only complete record of the fraud. She stole no money or jewelry. Before she reached the rear door, Nathaniel caught her. The bruise on her cheek came from his hand. The marks around her wrists came from the rope he used to hold her until morning. He still intended to marry her. Once she became his wife, he planned to declare her unstable and turn every accusation into the confused words of an unwell woman. Clara escaped through a loose window before sunrise. Nathaniel found her at the church. In front of the minister and the guests, he accused her of theft. His father called her dangerous. The people who had praised the marriage lowered their eyes while Clara stood alone in the dress they had helped prepare. The bells never rang. A Voss driver carried her beyond Silver Creek and abandoned her beside the frozen road. Riders followed when the family discovered the book was still missing. Clara told Elias only part of the truth. She said the Voss family would come for her, and that the book might prove Red Willow was being robbed. She did not mention Nathaniel's plan to control her through marriage. Some humiliations were still too fresh to survive another man's judgment. She offered to cook, mend clothing, scrub floors, or copy accounts. She asked only that Elias not summon the sheriff before she could prove the book mattered. He looked at the bruises around her wrists. He did not promise to believe her. He only said that no debt would be discussed until she could cross the room without falling. That afternoon, Clara entered the pantry wearing the borrowed wool dress. Burned into the wooden door was a broken willow branch, identical to the seal on the leather book. Beneath it, almost hidden by smoke and age, someone had carved two initials, A. W. They belonged to Elias Whitmore, Clara's father. He had been inside Red Willow Ranch long before she arrived, and whatever he had discovered there had followed his daughter into the snow. Elias found Clara standing before the pantry door with her fingers beneath her father's initials. Elias Whitmore had carved those uneven letters with the narrow accounting blade he always carried. Clara remembered watching him sharpen it when she was a child. He had visited Red Willow, yet he had never told her why. Elias did not press her for an answer she did not have. He led her to the ranch office, where two cabinets held feed receipts, cattle records, tax notices, and loan papers. The desk had belonged to his father, Elias Reed. Red Willow had once supported 20 workers and more than 1,000 cattle. Now only 6 men remained. Wages were behind. Another bank payment was due before spring, and Elias had already sold part of the breeding herd to meet the previous installment. The records claimed Elias Reed had borrowed heavily from the Voss Company before his death. Elias had never believed it. His father mistrusted lenders and would not have risked land that had belonged to the Reed family for 3 generations. Clara asked to compare the ranch accounts with the leather book. Elias did not give her full access. He placed one grain invoice on the desk and asked her to verify the delivery in the western storage shed. It was not trust. It was a small chance to earn it. Clara spent the afternoon among the grain sacks, where cold air entered through gaps in the walls. Her ribs hurt whenever she lifted anything, but she marked each row with chalk and counted every stack twice. Then she compared the weight stamps with the invoice. 12 sacks had never arrived. Red Willow had paid for grain it did not possess. Clara showed Elias the figures without accusing anyone. Her father had taught her that numbers became weaker when anger reached them first. Elias returned to the shed and repeated the count himself. She was correct. Gideon Hale arrived before they finished. He had managed Red Willow since Elias Reed was alive and spoke with the certainty of a man who believed the ranch could not survive without him. When he saw the invoice in Clara's hand, his expression hardened. Gideon dismissed the shortage as a recording error. He warned Elias that allowing a suspected thief near private accounts could help the Voss family claim the ranch was being mismanaged. Then he looked at Clara's borrowed dress and said a woman abandoned at her own wedding might do anything to secure another man's protection. Clara placed the invoice on a grain barrel before her hands could tremble. She did not defend herself. Men like Gideon used humiliation to pull attention away from facts. Elias folded the invoice and placed it inside his coat. He did not raise his voice or make a speech in Clara's defense. He simply ordered every future delivery to be counted before payment and told Gideon to open the remaining sheds for inspection. When Gideon protested, Elias repeated the order once. Then he removed the western shed key from Gideon's ring and placed it in Clara's palm. The iron was cold and heavier than it looked. Elias was not declaring her innocent. He was giving her something the Voss family and half of Silver Creek had denied her. A fair chance. That evening, Clara opened the leather book beneath the office lamp. She found 3 similar grain deliveries, each followed by a payment larger than the value of the supplies. Beside the dates were 2 faded letters. G. H. Gideon Hale's initials. Beneath the final entry, however, was a second mark, a small cross drawn in her father's hand. Before sunrise, Clara carried the leather book into the ranch office and placed it beside the grain invoices. The small cross drawn by her father appeared beside 3 other entries, each connected to supplies that Red Willow had paid for but never received. She arranged the records by date. The pattern became clearer as the morning light spread across the desk. Missing grain was followed by a loan from the Voss Company. Medicine that never reached the stable was followed by another payment. Fence posts, harness leather, and winter feed appeared on invoices, vanished before delivery, and then returned as debt against the ranch. Red Willow was being robbed twice. First, someone removed money through false purchases. Then the Voss family loaned Elias enough to cover the shortage and charged interest on money the ranch should never have needed. Elias stood across from Clara while she explained the pattern. He remained silent, but his hands tightened around the back of the chair. Clara opened the leather book to an entry carrying Thomas Reed's name. It recorded a new loan against the northern pasture. The date was 6 months after Thomas had been buried. Elias stared at it for a long time. Then he unlocked the lower desk drawer and removed a bundle of old letters tied with faded cord. One had been written by his father during a cattle drive years earlier. Clara placed it beside the loan document. At first glance, the signatures appeared almost identical. The same wide capital T, the same narrow curve in Reed, the same careful spacing between the names. But the last stroke was wrong. Thomas Reed had always finished his signature with a rising line, lightening the pressure as the pen left the paper. On the loan document, the final stroke fell sharply downward and ended in a dark pool of ink. Someone had copied the shape without understanding the movement of the hand. Clara examined the paper near the window. The ink on the signature was newer than the faded writing around it. The witness mark beneath it had been pressed too evenly, as though made by someone copying a seal rather than using one they owned. Elias asked how she could be certain. Clara explained that her father had taught her to study what numbers and signatures tried to hide. A false hand could imitate a letter, but it often failed to imitate habit. Pressure, hesitation, direction, and rhythm remained even when the shape looked convincing. She turned another page. A list of ranches appeared beneath the heading Transferred Accounts. Red Willow was named 5 times. 3 smaller properties near Silver Creek were listed beneath it. One entry had been torn almost completely away. Only 2 words remained. Auction authorized. Beside them was a date 14 days ahead. Clara felt the room tighten around her. Nathaniel had not sent riders into the storm because he feared the loss of a private ledger. He needed the book recovered before the auction. Without it, the forged debts would appear legitimate, and Red Willow would be sold before Elias could challenge them. A hoof struck frozen ground outside. Clara dropped the page. Her chair scraped backward, and she pressed herself against the wall before she understood what she was doing. The sound carried her back to the road, to the black horse behind her, and to Nathaniel's hand closing around her wrist. Elias did not reach for her. He moved between Clara and the window, watching the yard, until a ranch hand rode past, carrying fence wire. Only when the hoofbeats faded did he step aside. Clara looked at the forged signature, the false loans, and the damaged auction entry. She asked whether he believed her. Elias answered that belief was not the same as proof. Then he placed his father's letter beside the false document, but the evidence believed her. For anyone listening to Clara's story, this is the moment to decide whether she took the book to protect herself or to stop an entire county from being robbed. Share your judgment in the comments, because the answer would soon determine whether Red Willow survived. Clara lowered her eyes to the torn page. A trace of black sealing wax remained trapped in the binding. She warmed it carefully beneath the lamp, until a partial crest became visible. A hawk above 3 mountain peaks. The Voss family seal. Beneath the wax, nearly hidden by the torn edge, her father had written one final warning: do not trust the witness. The gray mare was found before dawn, lying in the far stall with her legs drawn beneath her. She was heavy with foal, and each breath lifted her ribs with painful effort. Gideon stood outside the stall and warned that the sickness might spread. He wanted the mare removed before the other horses weakened. Clara knelt beside the animal before Elias could answer. The mare's eyes were dull, but there was no fever beneath her jaw. Clara had seen the same trembling in animals her father once kept behind their house. The sickness had not begun inside the horse. It had come from something she had eaten. Clara opened the feed bin and sifted the grain through her fingers. Beneath the smell of oats was a faint, sour odor. When she broke one kernel with her thumbnail, she found dark softness inside. Moisture had entered the grain. She followed the sacks to the western shed. Several older bags had been pushed behind the newest delivery. Their seams were stained, and mold darkened the lower corners. Snowmelt had leaked through a split in the roof, but someone had hidden the damaged sacks where they would be used first. The mare had been eating spoiled feed for days. Elias ordered every affected sack removed. Gideon argued that Clara had no authority to condemn valuable grain. Elias ignored him and told the men to inspect every bag on the ranch. Clara stayed beside the mare. She offered small amounts of clean water mixed with salt, warmed blankets near the stove, and rubbed the animal's neck whenever the shaking worsened. Through the afternoon and into the night, she remained on the barn floor with straw clinging to her borrowed dress. No one had asked her to stay. She stayed because the mare had no voice with which to defend herself. Near midnight, one of the older ranch hands brought Clara coffee. By then, the men were watching her differently, not as the woman abandoned in the snow, but as someone who understood what the rest of them had missed. Before sunrise, the mare lifted her head. When morning light entered the barn, she pushed herself upright. Her legs trembled, but she remained standing. The recovery changed Red Willow more than any argument could have done. Over the next several days, ranch hands began leaving papers beside Clara's place at the office table. A receipt for medicine no one remembered receiving, a bill for harness leather that had never reached the tack room, a record claiming 3 calves had died before branding, though one worker remembered loading them alive into a wagon. Clara followed every entry. The medicine had been replaced with a cheaper mixture, while Red Willow paid full price. Saddles and bridles had been sold and listed as repairs. Healthy cattle had vanished beneath false death records. The ranch was not failing because Elias lacked judgment. It was being emptied piece by piece. While inspecting the outer sheds, Clara noticed that the northern fence leaned toward the ravine. Snow hid most of the damage, but the posts had rotted below the surface. The next hard wind could open a gap wide enough for frightened cattle to escape. Elias trusted her warning. He moved the men from less urgent work and repaired the fence before the afternoon storm. That night, the wind drove the herd toward the northern pasture. The cattle pressed against the new rails, and the fence held. Without Clara's warning, Red Willow might have lost much of its breeding stock. She then studied the market records and selected a small group of cattle already heavy enough for sale. Selling them early would provide money for clean feed and wages without weakening the herd that remained. Elias followed her plan. For the first time in months, every ranch hand received his full pay. Fresh grain filled the shed, the stable medicine was replaced, and the young worker who had prepared to leave unpacked his belongings. 2 days later, the cattle buyer returned. He had purchased animals carrying the Red Willow brand before, but not from Elias. The seller had been Gideon Hale. The buyer produced 3 receipts carrying Gideon's signature. Each payment had been transferred to an account controlled by the Voss Company. Clara compared the dates with the leather book. Every sale matched one of her father's crosses. Then she noticed the witness mark beneath the final receipt. It was the same mark that appeared beneath Thomas Reed's forged loan. The man who had witnessed the theft had also witnessed the debt. According to the county records, he had been dead for 8 years. After Gideon's name appeared on the cattle receipts, Elias removed him from the ranch office. He did not accuse the man before the workers. He simply took back the keys, locked the ledgers inside his desk, and announced that no purchase, sale, or payment would be approved without his signature. Gideon accepted the order in silence. The quiet that followed felt more dangerous than an argument. Each morning, Clara found a cup of coffee beside her papers. Elias never mentioned it. The cup was simply there, warm while frost covered the windows and the ranch house remained still. At first, she assumed he had made too much. Then she noticed he always placed it on the side of the desk where she preferred to work. Clara began leaving bread near the door before Elias rode out to inspect the herd. Neither of them called the exchange kindness. Naming it might have made it easier to lose. One evening, she found his winter coat beside the stove with a long tear beneath the shoulder. She repaired it with dark thread, following the old seam until the patch nearly disappeared. Elias noticed the work the next morning. He ran his thumb over the stitches and thanked her. Nathaniel had praised Clara whenever he wanted obedience. His compliments had always carried a demand behind them. Elias thanked her only because gratitude was owed. The difference stayed with her. A week later, he cut his palm while replacing a stable hinge. Clara brought him to the kitchen, cleaned the wound, and wrapped it in cloth. His hand was rough beneath hers, marked by rope burns and old scars. Neither of them spoke about how close they were. That evening, sleet struck the windows while the fire burned low. Clara finally told him why she had trusted Nathaniel's promise of marriage. He had offered a respectable name, a secure house, and protection from people who believed a woman without land belonged to whoever fed her. She had mistaken safety for love because she had known too little of either. Elias listened without interrupting. Then he told her about the rooms upstairs that had remained closed since his father and younger brother died. His brother had been thrown from a horse during a winter roundup. Thomas Reed had survived him by less than a year. After that, Elias stopped inviting people into the house. Every person he loved, he said, gave grief another door through which to enter. Clara understood. She had survived by expecting every door to close. A few days later, Elias opened the room that had belonged to his mother. A cedar chest inside held folded fabric, and he told Clara she could take what she needed for a new dress. He did not ask her to throw away the wedding gown. That decision remained hers. Clara removed a narrow strip of lace from its torn sleeve and held it above the stove flame until it curled black. She folded the rest into the chest. Healing did not always mean destroying every reminder. Sometimes it meant choosing which memories no longer held power. That night, Elias and Clara stood beneath the barn roof while snow moved across the yard. The gray mare pushed her nose into Elias's coat, searching for an apple. Clara laughed. The sound was small and surprised, as though it had escaped before she could stop it. Elias looked at her with the quiet wonder of a man hearing life return to an empty house. Then a loose board struck the outer wall. Clara stepped back, breath catching. One arm raised against a blow that never came. Elias did not touch her. He moved close enough for her to see him, but not so close that she felt trapped. He remained there until her breathing slowed. Nathaniel had treated fear as permission to control her. Elias treated it as a boundary. Later, as Clara crossed the yard toward the house, a rider appeared on the ridge beyond the northern pasture. The horse was black. She recognized it before the man turned his face toward Red Willow. Nathaniel Voss had found her. Nathaniel Voss reached Red Willow before noon. He rode beside Gideon Hale, followed by a deputy sheriff and a lawyer in a black coat. Their horses stopped before the ranch house in a straight line, making the visit look official before anyone spoke. Clara watched from the kitchen window. The black horse carried her back to the church steps, the torn lace at her wrists, and the silence of people who had chosen Nathaniel's name over her truth. Elias stepped onto the porch alone. Nathaniel unfolded a warrant accusing Clara of stealing money, private records, and property from the Voss estate. The lawyer warned that Elias could be charged with hiding a fugitive and interfering with lawful recovery. Gideon claimed Clara had manipulated Red Willow's accounts. He used the missing grain, the replacement medicine, the cattle sale, and his loss of authority as proof that she intended to seize control of the ranch. The lie was dangerous because it was built around work Clara had truly done. Nathaniel offered to withdraw the charges if she returned the leather book and rode back with him. He spoke as though he were offering mercy. Clara understood what he feared. The auction was near. Without the book, the forged debts would survive long enough for Red Willow to be sold. She moved toward the door, considering whether surrender might protect Elias from further trouble. Then Elias examined the warrant. He read every line despite the lawyer's demand for haste. The signature belonged to Judge Mercer, who had retired the previous autumn. The order also directed Clara into Voss custody instead of requiring her to appear before the sheriff. The document looked like law, but it offered none of law's protections. Elias handed it back. Nathaniel's calm began to crack. He warned that the bank could close Red Willow before spring. Then he said Clara had survived by attaching herself to any man foolish enough to defend her. Elias ignored the insult. He stepped down from the porch and placed himself between Clara and the riders. If you came for trouble, you found it. If you came for her, you'll leave disappointed. His voice remained quiet. The lawyer threatened to return with more deputies. Elias invited him to do so, provided Sheriff Amos Bell came personally, and the warrant was reviewed by a lawful judge. Nathaniel turned to Clara. He reminded her that Silver Creek already believed she was unstable. If she forced the matter into public view, every humiliation from the church would be repeated before the county. Fear rose inside her, but Red Willow stood behind her. The ranch hands had gathered near the stable. The gray mare moved inside her stall. The repaired fence held against the wind. Everything Nathaniel had tried to reduce to numbers remained alive. Clara walked onto the porch. She did not hide behind Elias. She told Nathaniel she would appear at the auction and present the records before the sheriff, the bank, and every rancher named in the book. For the first time, fear reached Nathaniel's face. For anyone listening, this is the moment to decide what courage truly means. Clara was still afraid, but she chose the truth over silence. Share your thoughts in the comments if you believe Elias was right to risk Red Willow by protecting her. The lawyer ordered the deputy to arrest her. The deputy hesitated. Elias asked whether he intended to seize a woman under the signature of a retired judge and deliver her to the man she accused. The deputy lowered his hand. Nathaniel gathered the reins of his black horse. Before leaving, He promised the auction would proceed with or without Clara. Only after the riders vanished did Clara open her hand. Her nails had left 4 red marks in her palm. Elias asked whether she still intended to go. Clara looked toward the office where the leather book waited beside Thomas Reed's forged signature. She had spent too long running from men who depended on silence. This time, Nathaniel would face the truth before everyone. By sunset, Red Willow no longer felt like a ranch waiting to be seized. It felt like a place preparing to testify. Elias sent one ranch hand to find Sheriff Amos Bell and another to bring Reverend Cole, who had witnessed Thomas Reed's real signature. A third rode south for the cattle buyer before the auction began. Clara remained in the office with the leather book, the forged loans, the grain invoices, and the receipts carrying Gideon's name. She arranged everything by date. Each missing shipment was placed beside the loan that followed it. Each stolen animal was matched with a false death record. Each payment to the Voss Company was connected to a receipt signed by Gideon or witnessed by a man already dead. The evidence had to tell one clear story. Nathaniel would depend on confusion. His lawyer would separate the papers, challenge each memory, and make years of fraud appear like harmless mistakes. Clara needed to show that every mistake belonged to the same deliberate chain. Elias asked the workers to write their statements separately. No man heard another account before completing his own. Their records described missing medicine, altered brands, unexplained cattle shipments, and Gideon's meetings with Voss riders. 3 copies were made of the most important pages. One remained in the ranch safe. One was sealed for Sheriff Bell. The third was hidden beneath a loose floorboard in Thomas Reed's old room. Nathaniel might steal one set. He could not erase them all. Late that night, Clara and Elias sat across from each other in the office. The lamp burned low between them, and the silence no longer allowed half-truths. Clara told him what had happened before the wedding. Nathaniel had caught her leaving the Voss office with the leather book beneath her coat. He struck her, tied her wrists, and locked her inside a storage room behind the grain warehouse. He did not intend to cancel the marriage. Once she became his wife, he planned to tell Silver Creek that grief had damaged her mind. Every accusation would be treated as illness. Every attempt to leave would become proof that she required control. Clara escaped through a window whose frame had rotted from rain. She reached the church believing the minister might protect her. Nathaniel arrived first with his father and changed the story before she could speak. By the time Clara tried to explain, the town had already decided whom to believe. Elias listened without interrupting. Clara admitted she had expected him to demand something in return for shelter. Every man who had offered security before had eventually named a price. Elias opened the desk drawer and removed the western shed key. He placed it beside the house key and the key to the ranch safe. Clara could leave before the auction, remain at Red Willow, or carry the evidence to the sheriff herself. None of those choices would create a debt between them. He did not push the keys toward her. He allowed her to choose. Clara placed her hand over the ranch key. It was the first time a man had offered her safety without asking for ownership. Near midnight, they returned to the leather book. Clara noticed the back cover felt thicker than the front and found that part of the binding had been sewn twice. Using her father's accounting blade, she opened the hidden seam. Inside was a folded letter wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with the broken willow mark. The writing across the front remained clear. For Elias Reed alone. Elias did not open it. A private letter found inside stolen records could be dismissed as false unless the seal was broken before witnesses. He decided it would be opened publicly at the auction before Sheriff Bell and Reverend Cole. The letter might save Red Willow. It might also prove that Clara's father had known about the fraud and remained silent. Before dawn, Clara changed into the dark blue dress made from the fabric in Elias's mother's cedar chest. She folded the ruined wedding gown and left it behind. Outside, the horses waited. Elias offered his hand but did not help her mount until she chose to take it. Together, they turned toward Silver Creek. Inside Clara's coat rested the book that could destroy the Voss family. Inside, the book waited the final words of Thomas Reed. And neither Clara nor Elias knew whose name he had written beside the word traitor. Silver Creek had gathered for the auction before the frost disappeared from Main Street. Ranchers stood beneath the courthouse, awning with folded notices in their hands. Merchants watched from the boardwalk. Men who owed money to the Voss Company kept their hats low, as though debt might recognize them in the crowd. Clara rode beside Elias through the center of town. She saw the church where Nathaniel had accused her. the freight office that had taken her father's records, and the people who had turned away while she stood alone in her wedding dress. This time, she did not lower her eyes. Inside the county hall, a map of Red Willow covered the front wall. The northern pasture, cattle, buildings, and water rights had been separated into individual lots. The ranch had been divided before the auction began. Nathaniel stood beside his father and the lawyer in the black coat. Gideon waited near the rear door. When Nathaniel saw Clara, he ordered the deputy to arrest her. Before the man could move, Sheriff Amos Bell stepped forward. He read the warrant, saw the retired judge's signature, and tore the paper through the center. Clara would remain under his protection until the evidence was heard. Nathaniel's lawyer argued that the leather book was stolen property. Sheriff Bell answered that evidence did not become false simply because the accused wanted it returned. Elias placed Thomas Reed's sealed letter on the clerk's table. Reverend Cole examined the broken willow mark and confirmed that Thomas had used the same seal on family deeds and church records for years. Only then did Elias break it. The letter was written in his father's hand. Thomas described shortages that began after Gideon took control of purchasing. Feed disappeared. Cattle were sold without authorization. Voss loans arrived whenever the ranch became too weak to meet its expenses. Thomas suspected Gideon but lacked proof strong enough to survive the Voss family's influence. So he turned to Elias Whitmore. Clara's father had kept accounts for ranchers throughout the county. He knew which debts were real, which brands had been altered, and which signatures had been copied. Thomas gave him the leather book and asked him to preserve every entry until the fraud could be exposed publicly. Amos had not remained silent. He had been collecting proof. The letter listed cattle numbers, forged loans, transfer dates, and payments routed through Voss accounts. It named the banker who processed them and the dead men whose signatures had been used. Then Elias reached the final paragraph. Thomas believed Gideon was the traitor inside Red Willow, but Gideon had not created the scheme. Nathaniel Voss had. A murmur moved through the hall. Nathaniel called the letter a forgery. His lawyer claimed Clara had written it after stealing the family seal. Reverend Cole placed an old church agreement beside the letter. The handwriting matched. More importantly, the paper carried the watermark of a mill that had closed years before Clara worked for the Voss family. The letter could not have been created recently. Clara opened the leather book. She spoke without anger, presenting one fact at a time. A grain shipment was charged to Red Willow but never delivered. 3 days later, the Voss company issued a loan for the same amount. 7 cattle were recorded as dead. The buyer's receipt proved Gideon had sold 7 healthy animals carrying the Red Willow brand that same week. Thomas Reed's signature appeared on a loan dated 6 months after his burial. Reverend Cole examined the witness mark beneath it. It carried his name. He had never signed the document. Another rancher stepped forward when Clara read the next account. His property appeared beside a debt twice the amount he had borrowed. A widow near the back recognized her husband's signature on a transfer completed after his death. The fraud reached far beyond Red Willow. The book contained the slow theft of half the county. Sheriff Bell called Gideon forward. He denied everything until the cattle buyer produced receipts carrying his signature. Clara placed the matching bank transfers beside them. One payment had entered a private Voss account on the same day Gideon reported the cattle dead. The sheriff asked who had ordered the false records. Gideon looked toward Nathaniel. It lasted only a moment, but everyone saw it. Nathaniel moved toward the rear door. Elias did not stop him. Sheriff Bell did. For years, the Voss family had controlled Silver Creek by forcing every victim to stand alone. Now the ranchers named in the book stood together. Clara closed the ledger. She had not entered the hall asking anyone to believe her. She had brought enough truth that belief was no longer necessary. Sheriff Bell closed the rear door before Nathaniel could reach it. For the first time that morning, the Voss family no longer controlled who spoke, where anyone stood, or when the truth would end. Gideon remained near the clerk's table, pale beneath his hat. He denied taking orders from Nathaniel, but Clara placed the bank transfers beside the cattle receipts. Every false sale led to the same Voss account. Every forged loan followed a shortage Gideon had created. The sheriff asked who had designed the scheme. Gideon looked toward Silas Voss, then Nathaniel. Neither man offered him protection. His confidence broke. He admitted that Nathaniel had ordered him to weaken Red Willow without destroying it too quickly. Missing grain, stolen cattle, and false repair bills kept the ranch desperate enough to borrow while preserving enough property for the Voss family to seize. The plan had begun while Thomas Reed was alive. When Thomas became suspicious, Gideon warned Nathaniel. After Thomas died, the Voss family continued creating loans beneath his copied signature, certain that a dead man could not challenge a debt. Nathaniel called Gideon a thief trying to save himself. Clara opened the leather book to a page written in Nathaniel's hand. It recorded a payment to Gideon beside the words "Northern Herd Transferred." Beneath it remained a trace of the same black wax found on the auction authorization. Nathaniel could deny Gideon's memory. He could not deny his own writing. The banker, named in Thomas Reed's letter, stepped forward and admitted processing transfers under pressure from Silas Voss. Some documents arrived already signed. Others carried witness marks copied from county files. Reverend Cole confirmed that his name had been forged. 2 ranchers identified false extensions on their debts. The widow near the back of the hall placed her husband's burial notice beside a land transfer signed months after his death. The auction clerk removed the Red Willow map from the wall. Sheriff Bell suspended the sale. No pasture, animal, building, or water right could be transferred until every Voss account had been examined. The warrant against Clara was canceled. Nathaniel, Silas, and Gideon were arrested for fraud, theft, forgery, and conspiracy. The lawyer in the black coat was ordered to remain in Silver Creek while his role was investigated. No one cheered. The room was too quiet for celebration. Too many people were beginning to understand the price of their silence. The county clerk announced that Elias Whitmore's house and records would be sealed until they could be returned to Clara as his lawful heir. Every debt claimed by the Voss family would be reviewed against the leather book. Clara stood before the same town that had watched Nathaniel disgrace her outside the church. Several people lowered their eyes. One woman tried to apologize. Clara stopped her gently. She did not ask the town to beg forgiveness. She asked them to remember what had happened the next time a poor woman accused a powerful man. Truth did not become smaller because the person carrying it had no land, money, or respected family name. Elias stepped beside her. He told the hall that Clara had not saved Red Willow through luck. She had saved it by reading what others ignored, protecting animals no one listened to, and refusing to let fear make her silent. His words restored her name more completely than any apology could have done. For anyone who believes quiet courage deserves to be heard, share this story. Leave your thoughts about Clara in the comments, and subscribe so more stories of justice and dignity can reach those who need them. Outside, the courthouse bell rang noon. Nathaniel was led across the street in handcuffs. Clara watched him pass without stepping back. Red Willow was safe. Her father's name was cleared. Her home would be returned. For the first time since the snowstorm, Clara had somewhere else she could go, and Elias did not know whether she would choose to leave. Spring came slowly to Red Willow. Snow remained beneath the northern trees even after the road to Silver Creek turned to mud. The ranch did not become rich overnight. There were still honest debts to pay, fences to repair, and cattle lost during winter. But nothing was being stolen anymore. Clara rebuilt the accounts from the first page. Every delivery required 2 signatures. Every animal sold was recorded by brand, weight, buyer, and payment. The office that had once hidden Gideon's theft became the clearest room on the ranch. The gray mare recovered and grew heavy with foal. The ranch hands began asking Clara's opinion before ordering supplies or moving cattle. None of them called her a burden now. They had seen the northern fence hold, received the wages her plan made possible, and watched her carry the truth into a room controlled by the Voss family. Her father's house was returned in early April. The roof leaked, one window was broken, and most of the furniture was gone. Elias helped repair the chimney and replace the damaged boards, but he never spoke as though the work gave him any claim over her future. Clara could remain there. She could open an accounting office in Silver Creek. Several ranchers had already asked for her help. She could also sell the house and leave the county. For the first time, every road before her belonged to her. One evening, Elias found her standing on the repaired porch. He told her that she owed Red Willow nothing for the food, shelter, or clothes she had received. Clara reminded him that she had worked. He answered that her work had saved far more than she could ever owe. Then he gave her the choice he had feared since the auction. If she wanted a life in town, he would help her build it. If she wanted to leave Silver Creek, he would take her to the station. And if she chose Red Willow, there would always be a place for her. He did not ask her to stay. That was why she could finally choose to. 3 nights later, the gray mare went into labor during a spring storm. Clara and Elias worked beside each other beneath the barn lantern. The birth was difficult, but near dawn a dark-legged foal lay trembling in the straw. Elias held the lamp while Clara cleared its nose and rubbed warmth into its body. When the foal finally stood, she laughed through tears she did not hide. Rain washed the last snow from the yard. Clara looked toward the house where she had first awakened afraid, the office where her father's truth had been recovered, and the gate Elias had opened without asking what she could give him in return. She told him she would keep her father's house because it belonged to her past, but Red Willow was where she wanted to live. Elias placed a ranch key in her palm. It was not payment, charity, or permission to belong. He asked whether she would help him build Red Willow as his equal. Clara closed her fingers around the key. Months later, they married beneath the cottonwood trees near the northern pasture. There was no crowded church and no family deciding her future. Clara walked toward Elias in a simple blue dress, carrying nothing she needed to hide. They promised honesty, patience, and the freedom to speak without fear. That evening, they returned to the ranch as rain moved softly across the fields. Elias paused at the door and reminded Clara that she could still choose any life she wanted. She looked inside at the repaired coat near the stove, the lamp beside the account books, and 2 cups of coffee waiting on the table. It became home the day you opened the door. Then Clara stepped inside by choice, and this time, the door closed against the storm without shutting her in.